I got the text from my mom while I was eating a cold sandwich at my desk during a Thursday lunch break. The kind of day where everything's gray and you forget what season it even is because your office has no windows and your calendar is just a sea of Zoom meetings and Jira tickets. Hey honey, just wanted to share the good news with 2 exclamation marks and a blurry photo attached, which I tapped out of habit, assuming it was going to be a picture of one of her god-awful garden gnomes she insists on repainting every spring. But no, there was the lake house. My dad standing there with his arm around Zach, grinning like a damn toothpaste commercial, and Mom holding up a champagne bottle with a handwritten sign that read, "Congrats, Zach, the new owner of Maple Bay." The next few seconds were oddly quiet in my head, like the air just got sucked out of the room, even though I was surrounded by people clicking keyboards and slurping coffee. I stared at the photo for a long beat, then read the rest of her message. We decided to pass on the lake house to Zach and the kids. They'll make such wonderful memories. Hope you're doing well. Love you. No punctuation after that last one. Just the silence that hits when you realize your family has officially stopped pretending to even make the effort. Let me back up a little. The lake house wasn't just some dusty cabin we inherited from a distant aunt. That place was my entire damn childhood. Maple Bay, Michigan. A 2-story cedar frame that smelled like mildew and motor oil and whatever was cooking in the little galley kitchen. My dad bought it in the early 90s as a fixer-upper when we didn't even have a working dryer at home. Every summer, instead of camps or vacations or soccer leagues, I spent those weeks with a hammer in my hand, side by side with Dad, pulling nails out of rotted deck boards and painting those creaky shutters forest green. Zach? He was barely there. I mean, literally. By the time he was old enough to help, he was already off doing band camp or sleeping in until 2 in the afternoon. Mom always made excuses. Let him enjoy being a kid. Greg, not everyone needs to be Mr. Responsibility like you. I was 15 when I rewired the front porch light. 17 when I fixed the plumbing under the kitchen sink after Dad gave up and just handed me a wrench. That place was mine in all the ways that mattered. I had my first beer on that dock. My first real kiss behind the shed with a girl from the cottage 2 doors down. I even carved my initials under the bench swing when I was 21 and drunk off my ass one 4th of July, thinking I was immortal and important. And now Zach, who once broke a window trying to shoot a squirrel with a BB gun, owns the whole damn place? I called my mom. No answer. Not the first time. She tends to text now, says phone calls make her anxious. So I texted, "Can we talk about the lake house?" She replied 5 minutes later with, "Oh honey, don't be upset. We just figured you wouldn't want the hassle. You're always so busy and far away." Busy? Far away? I live 90 minutes from that place, and I offered to buy it outright 2 years ago when Dad mentioned it was becoming a burden. I even drew up a spreadsheet of costs and maintenance estimates because, God forbid, I ever do anything without over-preparing. I didn't text back. I just sat there, watching that photo again. Zach in his stupid Patagonia vest, raising a glass like he just landed a movie deal. The kids holding sparklers on the deck I stained with my bare hands when I was 19. I felt something settle in my stomach, not a sharp pain, but that slow, simmering weight of realization. Like cement hardening under your ribs. It's not like this was the first time. Zach's always been the golden boy. He got the bigger bedroom when we were kids, even though I was older. Got the new car at 16 while I drove a rusted-out hand-me-down I had to fix myself. When he flunked out of college for the first time, they let him move back in rent-free and helped him get a job to find his rhythm again. I, on the other hand, paid my own way through school working tech support and eating instant noodles, and no one once asked if I was doing okay. But this? Giving him that house? That was the last nail in the coffin. I didn't even tell them how much it hurt. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. To them, I was fine. The dependable one. The adult they never had to worry about. I didn't cause scenes, didn't bring drama, didn't need a bailout. And in a family like ours, silence isn't strength, it's invisibility. Zach called me that weekend. I almost didn't pick up, but I figured, what the hell? Might as well hear it from the man himself. Hey bro, did mom tell you the good news? Yeah, got the text. Pause. Then a laugh. Cool, right? I mean, it just made sense, you know? We've got the kids, and Dad said you were probably too busy with work anyway. Too busy? I could feel my jaw lock. Sure, makes sense. Hey, you're welcome up anytime though, man. It's still your old room and everything. We can have a beer on the dock, just like old times. I hung up. No yelling. No explosion. Just a quiet, surgical removal. A slice of history handed off like a party favor, and I was supposed to clap from the sidelines. The kicker came 2 days later. Another photo. This time, Zach's family in matching red flannel pajamas on the porch of the lake house, a big Christmas wreath behind them, holding mugs and grinning with a caption Mom added that just read, "Our Christmas at Maple Bay." That's when something broke. Not snapped. Broke. Clean. Cold. Final. The group text came in while I was folding laundry, one of those simple mundane routines that let your mind wander just enough to catch you off guard when life decides to punch you in the ribs. It wasn't even addressed directly to me, just a bubble in a thread titled Family Christmas 2025, which I had apparently been added to at some point last year. The message read, "Hey everyone. So excited for Christmas at the cabin. Just a heads up, we're packed this year, no room left. Hope you're good." That was it. No greeting. No direct mention of my name. No follow-up. Just a one-line message with the energy of someone letting you know the last slice of pizza was already taken. I stood there in my apartment, staring at the phone in my hand, a still warm t-shirt in my other, and for a long second, I didn't even know how to respond. Because the truth is, I wasn't shocked. Not really. If anything, I was embarrassed to realize I had been expecting something different. Like a fool. I scrolled up in the thread to see who was even going. Zach's wife, Julie, had sent a photo of their kids in elf pajamas next to a stack of gift boxes. My cousin Daryl posted something about bringing homemade cider. Even Aunt Barb, who lives in Phoenix and hasn't left Arizona since Clinton was in office, was coming. And me? I was good, apparently. So good that nobody even asked if I had plans. Nobody asked if I wanted to join. They just assumed I'd be fine somewhere else. That cabin, by the way, was not some Airbnb or neutral location. It was the lake house. My lake house. Or at least, the one I thought would be mine someday. The one where I scraped paint off window frames while Zach rode a jet ski around like a Red Bull ad in human form. Now they were packing it full of people, stringing lights and baking cookies, and didn't even think to include me. Not enough beds, I guess. Or maybe just not enough interest. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch, the laundry forgotten in a heap beside me. It wasn't just the message. It was what it meant. This wasn't a one-time oversight. This was a pattern. This was a message with years behind it. It told me I was an afterthought. That if I didn't show up, the party would still go on. Maybe even run more smoothly. I thought back over the last 20-plus Christmases. There was the year I flew back from Seattle in the middle of a snowstorm and slept on an air mattress in the living room just to be there for Mom's Christmas Eve chili. The year I canceled a ski trip with friends because Zach and Julie had a newborn, and I didn't want them to be overwhelmed. I remembered shoveling that cabin's entire driveway at 6 in the morning so nobody would slip on the ice before brunch. But now I was so completely not a part of it that I didn't even warrant a direct phone call. I called Zach. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Same thing. I didn't leave a message. What was I even going to say? Hey, thanks for inviting everyone except me? Or maybe just checking if I'm still in this family, or did I miss the memo? I tossed the phone onto the couch and just stared out the window at nothing in particular. The sun was already setting, even though it wasn't even 5 o'clock yet. Winter daylight always makes the world feel smaller, like the hours are folding in on themselves. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was the casualness of it. The way they brushed me aside without even realizing it might hurt. As if my presence never made much of a difference in the first place. And it hit me in that moment, really hit me, that I was the backup plan. The emergency contact. The guy who got the call when the family car broke down or someone needed help moving, but never the one they built plans around. Never the main character in their story. That night, I didn't eat dinner. Just microwaved a mug of peppermint hot chocolate I found in the pantry and stood in the kitchen holding it like a prop. My apartment was quiet. Too quiet. No Christmas music, no pine candles, no lights. I hadn't even bothered decorating because I assumed I'd be at the lake house again. With them. With family. But family, I realized, is a word people throw around like wrapping paper. It looks good on the outside, but you find yourself choking on it if you try to swallow it whole. I lay in bed later and opened that group thread again. Scrolled through pictures of them hanging stockings over the stone fireplace I helped build. Zach had added a string of garland along the mantel and spelled out Merry AF in glitter letters. Julie captioned it, "When the whole family comes together, magic happens." I laughed. A bitter, dry, empty kind of laugh. Magic. Sure. The kind where someone disappears and no one notices. I thought about texting back. Something passive-aggressive, maybe? Something like, "Guess I'll go spend Christmas with people who remember I exist." But I didn't, because the truth is, that would only prove they still had power over me. That I still wanted to be part of whatever this broken mess of a family was. So I did nothing. I let it sit there. Would you have said something? Would you have called them out, risked a fight just to make them see how shitty it was? Or would you have stayed quiet like I did, letting the silence speak louder than any guilt trip could? I honestly don't know what would have been better. But what I do know is this: something shifted inside me that night. Some final wire snapped and curled back in on itself, no longer useful for holding anything together. Maybe that's what Christmas is for some people, a time to realize who you're still holding space for and who stopped holding it for you. Either way, I wasn't going to beg for a chair at a table I built with my own hands. Not this time. Not ever again. The thing about resentment is that it doesn't show up all at once like a tornado tearing through your life. It builds slowly, stacking up in layers like old receipts in a junk drawer, until one day you open it and everything comes spilling out in a mess you can't ignore anymore. That's exactly what happened the night after they told me there was no room at the lake house, when I found myself staring into the dark with that same tightness in my chest I used to get as a kid when I couldn't fall asleep after being told I was overreacting. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, something smoky and sharp enough to cut through the fog in my head, and sat down at the desk where I keep my old files, mostly unopened. The kind of stuff I only go through during tax season or when I'm trying to remember if I ever paid off that second credit card. And there, in a faded manila folder with my brother's name scrawled on the tab, was the paperwork I hadn't looked at in years. It was from back in 2008, when Zach was finally ready to grow up and stop renting apartments with beer-stained carpets and roommates who stole his cereal. He called me one night, voice sheepish, said he'd found this starter home just outside town. Nothing fancy, but perfect for him and Julie, who was pregnant at the time. They didn't have much saved, obviously, because Zach had just left his third teaching job in as many years and Julie was working part-time at a vet's office. I was doing all right for myself then. Tech job, no kids, modest apartment. And I guess I still had that big brother instinct that made me want to keep everyone afloat, even when I knew they wouldn't do the same for me. Zach asked if I could help with the down payment. Not all of it, just a bridge loan, something to get the mortgage approved. I told him I'd think about it, and then a week later I wired $25,000 to his escrow account. Not as a gift. Not as a handout. As a loan. I had our dad draw up some basic documents, just a simple agreement between brothers, and as a safety measure, Dad's words, not mine, they put my name on the deed, just in case anything went sideways. Don't worry, Dad had said over the kitchen table that weekend, swirling his coffee like he was some kind of real estate tycoon. "We'll transfer the title clean once everything settles. Just need to keep it simple for the bank." I didn't argue. I trusted them. Trusted that people meant what they said and would follow through. That was my mistake. Over time, I forgot about the details. Life got busy, as it always does. Zach and Julie moved in, had another kid, repainted the house, got a dog. They hosted Thanksgiving there once and invited me to sit at the bachelor table with their neighbor who was going through a divorce. I made a mental note to laugh less around them after that. He never mentioned the loan again. Not once. Not the money. Not the deed. Not the agreement. It was like it had never happened. So now, sitting there in my apartment, holding those dusty papers like they were some kind of forgotten treasure map, I opened up the county assessor's website and typed in the address. It loaded slow, one of those outdated government portals that feels like it's running on a hamster wheel and a prayer. I scrolled down to the ownership tab, and there it was. Clear as day. The title was still in my name. Not Greg and Zach. Not Zach with a lean to Greg. Just me. Sole owner. Gregory Allen Thompson. I sat back in my chair, stared at the screen for a full minute, and then said out loud to nobody, "Oh, hell no." I wasn't angry, not in the way I used to be. This wasn't the kind of anger that boiled over and made you want to punch a wall. This was cold, focused, surgical. A switch flipped in my brain, and suddenly everything felt very, very clear. I opened my contacts, scrolled down, and called Ron. Ron's a lawyer friend from college who owes me more than one favor and knows how to handle things quietly. I told him what I'd found. Told him I wasn't looking for drama or revenge, just facts and options. He asked me to send over the deed and any documentation I had. "If your name's on that title," he said, "you've got more leverage than you think." I hung up and sat there in the glow of my monitor, listening to the hum of the old radiator in the corner, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. For once, I wasn't the one sitting at the kids' table, waiting to be invited to play with the grown-ups. I was the one holding the keys to a house that my brother had lived in like it was his castle, completely oblivious to the foundation it sat on. And it hit me then, not just what I could do, but what I was going to do. That house Zach called our home, the one where they raised their kids and painted the nursery and hosted barbecues without ever once mentioning my name, that house was never his. Not legally. Not financially. Not in any world where fairness had a seat at the table. It was mine. It always had been. They just didn't think I'd ever realize it. Or worse, they thought I wouldn't care enough to act. But they were wrong. They were so incredibly wrong. There's a kind of power in doing something quietly, without yelling or fanfare or the desperate need to be seen, just deliberate, controlled action that leaves everyone else scrambling after the dust settles. That's the place I was in when I decided to sell the house, not out of anger or spite, not in a heat-of-the-moment burst, but from something deeper and colder, a kind of justice I had never let myself believe I deserved until now. After the phone call with Ron, I waited exactly 1 week before doing anything further, just to make sure I wasn't going to second-guess myself or talk myself into forgiving everyone one more time like I'd done so many damn times before. But nothing softened. If anything, the days that followed only made things more vivid. I started remembering every time my brother borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, every family dinner where Mom asked Zach about his job and asked me about the weather. Every casual dismissal. Every subtle cut. Ron referred me to a guy named Travis, a real estate agent who handled discreet off-market sales for a certain type of client. The type who didn't want a lot of noise. Travis was lean, sharp, and wore loafers without socks, which usually would have irritated me, but he had a way of talking that let you know he got things done. I sent him the address, the scanned deed, and the rough condition report from 2 years back. Within 48 hours, he had a buyer lined up, a local business owner who had been looking to pick up a second property for his son, who'd just graduated from college. "Cash offer," Travis said, flipping his tablet around to show me the figures. "No contingencies. Quick close." We can wrap this up in 3 weeks, tops. I didn't hesitate. I signed. The papers were filed. Certified letters were sent to the property notifying the current occupant, Zach, that the title holder was transferring ownership. Legal notice. All above board. No tricks. If he'd just opened his goddamn mail, he would have had time to call me, or Ron, or anyone. But Zach, as usual, lived in a world where nothing bad ever really happened to him, where consequences were theoretical and the mail was probably just junk unless it had a birthday card in it. The closing date came and went without a single word from him. No text, no voicemail, no angry call demanding answers. I asked Travis if he'd heard anything. He said nope. Smooth sailing. So that Friday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after I signed the last document, I drove out to the neighborhood where my brother had played suburban dad for over a decade, parked across the street from the house that still looked exactly like I remembered, and watched as a small white pickup pulled into the driveway with a big red ribbon taped to the hood. The buyer stepped out, followed by a deputy sheriff who was there to enforce the eviction notice, standard procedure, given that Zach and his family hadn't responded to any of the legal notices. The deputy was calm, respectful, knocked on the door 3 times. I saw Julie answer through the slats of my windshield, and for a second I could see her face transform in real time, that exact moment where confusion turns to fear, then disbelief, then panic. Zach came to the door behind her, shirtless, confused, holding a coffee mug. The deputy handed him the paperwork. Julie started yelling, loud enough that I could hear her from the car. The kids appeared in the window behind them, eyes wide, one of them crying. Julie turned and screamed something at Zach, something like, "I told you to open the goddamn mail," before she slammed the door shut. The new owner stood there patiently, expression unreadable, hands in his pockets. The deputy knocked again. Zach reappeared with his shirt half on, clearly trying to bargain, asking for time, asking for understanding. But the wheels were already in motion. The law had done its part. The property was no longer his. And the wild thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like cheering or pumping my fist or any of that petty movie script revenge crap. I just sat there, watching from the safety of my car like it was someone else's life unraveling in front of me. Because in a way it was. That house had never truly been his. It had always belonged to me, in the legal sense and in the sense that I'd made it possible. All I'd done was correct the record. Julie came out next, clutching a trash bag filled with what looked like clothes or toys, yelling at someone on the phone, tears running down her cheeks. The kids followed, one of them carrying a stuffed elephant. Zach stayed in the doorway, arms limp at his sides, his mouth moving, but no one listening anymore. I could have rolled down the window. I could have gotten out. I could have told them what they refused to see for all those years, that they had treated me like an insurance policy they could cash in whenever they wanted, never expecting that I'd ever say no, but I didn't do any of that. I started the engine, put the car in drive, watched as the new owner stepped over the threshold and into his newly acquired property, and I just drove away. Once I was back on the highway, the sun already sinking behind the trees, I pulled over at a rest stop, opened my phone, and went through every number associated with my family. Zach, Julie, Mom, Dad, the group text, even my Aunt Barb from Phoenix, and blocked them all, one by one. Not out of rage. Not out of spite. Just peace. Absolute, undiluted peace. I hit the gas again and didn't look back. The first voicemail came 3 days after the house officially changed hands, a message that landed like a ghost from the past on a number I didn't recognize, left at midnight, as if the darkness might somehow soften the blow or make me more receptive to guilt. I had just gotten home from work, still wearing my badge and a hoodie that smelled like fried food from the gas station I'd stopped at for dinner, when I saw the missed call. The number had no name, just an out-of-state area code I didn't associate with anyone, but I played the message anyway because curiosity always wins the first round. It was my mother's voice, quiet at first, then cracking as she went on. Greg, it's me. I didn't know if this number would work, but I needed to try. I just don't understand why you'd take it this far. We didn't think you'd actually do something so cruel. I know you're hurt, I know, but this is beyond hurt. This is. I don't know who you are anymore. She was crying by the end. The kind of crying that's more for show than grief, full of sniffles that come at just the right beat, like she practiced it in front of a mirror before dialing. You were always the strong one, Greg. Always. Why are you doing this to us, she said, like I'd set fire to the family Bible or punched a priest. I didn't reply. I didn't even save the message, but I didn't delete it either. The next morning, my inbox was flooded with Facebook messages from people I hadn't talked to in years, cousins, distant aunts, old family friends who used to pinch my cheeks at reunions and pretend they remembered my name. They were all saying the same kind of thing, just in different fonts and levels of passive aggression. Hey Greg, heard there's been some drama, maybe we can talk? Or just wanted to say, I hope you're okay, your mom is really upset. Or the worst of them, it's never too late to fix things with your family. Fix what, exactly? The fact that they excluded me from Christmas, like I was some coworker they forgot to CC on the potluck email? The fact that I funded a house and was treated like a stranger renting a spare room? Or maybe they meant fix the role I'd been expected to play since I was 10 years old, the silent one, the one who doesn't make waves, the one who carries the burden so no one else has to lift a finger. I didn't respond to any of them, not one. I watched as the message count climbed like a thermometer in the sun, and then one by one I hit the ignore button, sent them to the purgatory of unread requests where I knew they'd sit and fester, just like they had let me do for years. But I won't lie, there was a voice in my head, not loud but steady, that asked if I was going too far, if this was vengeance or justice, if maybe I'd finally crossed that invisible line from wrong to wrongdoer. I thought about the kids. Zach's kids. The ones who had no idea what a deed was or what a down payment meant. The ones who just knew they had to leave their home because of something between grown-ups that they would never fully understand. I thought about Julie, sobbing on the porch, her voice muffled behind her hands, shouting at Zach not for what he did to me, but for what he didn't do to prevent it. I even thought about my dad, who still hadn't called or messaged, who probably sat in his recliner with a beer and muttered, "Let the boys figure it out," as if it was just another one of our little scuffles over who got the front seat. But mostly, I thought about my mother. And that voicemail. That syrupy voice she uses when she wants to be the victim and the hero at the same time. We didn't think you'd take it this far. As if I had started the fire instead of simply refusing to hand over the extinguisher this time. As if my silence all these years hadn't been taken as permission to keep sidelining me until I finally stopped asking to play. And then came the message from my cousin Leah, someone I'd always thought had more sense than the rest of them. She said, "You've always been so distant, Greg. This isn't the first time you've pulled away. Maybe it's time you looked in the mirror." That one hit differently. Because yeah, I have been distant. I've always been the one who skipped the family group chat, the one who ducked out of reunions early, who chose solo vacations over extended family camping trips. But that distance wasn't coldness, it was self-preservation. It was the armor I built after every holiday dinner where no one asked about my life, every birthday where my name was scribbled on a card as an afterthought. I didn't pull away because I didn't care. I pulled away because I finally realized they didn't. So I let the silence sit. Let it grow. Let it become its own answer. I didn't go on social media. I didn't pick up my phone unless it was for work or takeout. I didn't explain myself because I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. And in that silence, something strange happened. I started to sleep better. Not just longer, but deeper. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning like I used to, searching for some kind of connection that never came. I even started going for walks after work, just to breathe air that wasn't recycled through an HVAC system, and to remind myself that I existed outside of their orbit. And yet, every night that week, I played that voicemail again. Not because I missed her. Not because I felt guilty. But because I needed to hear it. Those final words. You were always the strong one, Greg. Why are you doing this to us? I would sit in the dark, letting those words play through the little speaker on my phone, and every time I heard them, I reminded myself that strength doesn't mean being the one who stays. Sometimes, strength means finally walking away and not looking back, even when the whole damn family starts screaming behind you. And this time, I wasn't turning around. It didn't take long for the story to get rewritten in their favor, which honestly didn't surprise me, because if there's one thing my family does well, it's spin a narrative that makes them look like the victims while painting everyone else as unstable, selfish, or simply going through something. I wasn't even mad about it, just amazed at how fast they managed to organize, as if I'd launched some personal attack campaign instead of just drawing a boundary for the first time in my life. The first sign that the narrative had changed came through a Facebook message from my cousin Jen, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, but who apparently had just enough emotional currency to come charging in under the pretense of concern. "Hey Greg," she wrote, "your mom's really worried about you. She said you've been acting erratically, and that maybe you're having a bit of a breakdown. I just want you to know we're all here if you need help." I sat there staring at the message, eyebrows raised, wondering how we jumped from property disputes to implied psychiatric emergencies. I mean, sure, it stung a little to be painted as the crazy one, but mostly I felt the strange, calm clarity settle over me, like I was watching a play I'd seen 100 times and could now recite every line from memory. That line about me having a breakdown? It wasn't for Jen's benefit. It was to soften the story. To give everyone permission to pity me instead of confronting the truth that maybe, just maybe, I had stopped accepting less than I deserved. I replied to her after a full day of silence. Just one message. Nah, I didn't have a breakdown. I had a breakthrough. She didn't respond. Never even opened it, as far as I can tell. Probably screenshotted it and sent it straight to the family group chat, the one I was never invited to be part of but always heard about through vague references and accidental forwards. It was right around then that I started remembering all the things I used to do without thinking, every ride to the airport I gave, every loan that never came back, every time I fixed Zach's busted laptop or rewired Mom's thermostat or unclogged Dad's gutter in the dead of winter, because you're so good with that stuff, Greg, and you're not too busy, right? I used to think those were just the small prices you pay to stay in the circle, to remain needed and wanted. But looking back, I realize now I wasn't being included. I was being used. There was the time Zach lost his job and asked me to float him for a month. I sent him a check without hesitation, even though I was barely making ends meet myself. Never saw a dime of it back. Or the year Mom had surgery and I dropped everything, literally rescheduled an entire conference trip to stay in town just in case she needed anything. Zach sent flowers from out of state. Everyone praised him for thinking of her. I was the one wiping soup off her chin while she complained about the hospital food. And every single time, I told myself this was just how family worked. That one day, when I needed help, they'd do the same for me. But that day never came. When I got laid off and was struggling to find work, no one called to ask how I was holding up. When I ended my engagement 3 years ago and could barely crawl out of bed, the best I got was a text from Mom saying, "Maybe this is for the best." So yeah, maybe I had a breakthrough. The kind where the scales finally fall from your eyes and you see the whole damn machine for what it is. And just when I thought the storm had passed, just when I'd gotten used to the idea that I was now the family pariah and would probably stay that way, there was a knock on my front door. Not a casual tap. A full-on, knuckle-splitting slap of frustration that only comes when someone's been holding back rage for too long. I didn't even have to look through the peephole to know it was Zach. You can feel a person's energy through the walls when they're that angry. I just stood there, coffee in hand, and listened as he banged again. "Greg," he shouted. "Open the door, man. We need to talk." I said nothing. This is insane. What you did. Do you even realize what you've done to my family? Still, I said nothing. I just walked over to the kitchen and added more creamer to my coffee, stirred it slowly, and took a sip. The banging continued. Are you really going to do this? Just shut us all out like we're strangers. And in that moment, the irony nearly made me laugh. Because strangers, at least, don't pretend to love you while bleeding you dry. The banging eventually stopped. There was a long pause, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps, then silence. I walked to the living room window and peeked through the blinds, just enough to watch him stand there on the curb for a moment, pacing, frustrated, yelling into his phone at someone, I'm guessing Julie, before finally getting into his car and speeding off like some scorned lover who'd just realized the breakup was real. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt clear. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't someone's emotional mule. I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the fixer, the forgiver, the one who bends so others don't have to. I was just a man in his own house, drinking coffee while the people who used to hold him hostage with their needs finally realized the locks had changed. And as I took another sip and let the silence settle into my bones, I whispered it aloud to the empty room, just to hear it in the air. I finally don't owe anyone anything. It showed up tucked in with a grocery store circular and some pre-approved credit card offers, the kind of mail that usually ends up in the trash without a second glance. Except this one was different. It had my name on it, written in my mother's shaky, looping cursive, like it had taken her extra effort to make it look just distressed enough to feel sincere. The envelope was pale blue, the kind you might associate with sympathy cards or old-fashioned thank you notes, the kind you only ever send when you're trying to communicate something bigger than your words can carry on their own. I stood there for a moment in the doorway, mail in one hand, keys still in the other, just staring at it like it might explode if I opened it too fast. I hadn't seen her handwriting in years. Texts and emails had long taken over, and even before that, she wasn't the kind to write much by hand unless it was to send out Christmas cards or address a casserole dish. But this had weight. The kind of weight you don't assign to just any message. I knew even before I opened it that something had changed. I walked inside, dropped everything else on the counter, sat down at the table, and peeled the envelope open as slowly as if it were a balm wire. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a faint scent of her perfume, some blend of lavender and drugstore talc she'd worn since I was a kid. The letter was written in pen, every line carefully spaced, the ink pressing a little too hard into the paper in some places, like she had to force the words out against their will. It started like this. Gregory, I don't expect you to read this. Already, I hated it. She went on to say that Dad was sick, that he had been for a while, but they hadn't wanted to worry me, which of course meant they didn't want to deal with the possibility that I might not react the way they wanted me to. She said the cancer was moving fast. Said they'd caught it late. Said there were treatments, but no guarantees. Then she added the line that gutted me more than I expected. He still asks about you, even when he's in pain. There was something about that phrasing that pissed me off more than it broke my heart. Even when he's in pain. As if checking on me was some grand act of mercy from a man who spent most of my life keeping me at arm's length unless I was fixing something he didn't want to pay a professional for. She closed with, You don't want to live with regrets, Greg. Not after he's gone. No matter how angry you are, he's still your father. I folded the letter neatly and set it down, then walked to the fridge, pulled out a beer I wasn't even in the mood for, and cracked it open just for something to do with my hands. I stood there, letting the cold settle in my palm, replaying her words like some internal radio station on a loop. It wasn't the news that hit me hardest. It was the tactic. The appeal to guilt. The framing of pain as obligation. The subtle way she painted silence as cruelty and forgiveness as a moral duty. I brought it to therapy the next day, the folded letter tucked inside a worn notebook I'd been using to track how many days I'd gone without responding to any of them. My therapist, a woman named Danielle who has the calm, unshakable voice of someone who's heard every kind of grief 100 times, read it silently while I sat across from her and tried not to fidget. When she finished, She looked at me and asked the question that had already been bouncing around inside my head for 24 hours. Is avoiding regret worth reopening wounds that never healed right in the first place? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. She could tell I didn't know yet. The next morning, I got in my car and started driving without telling anyone where I was going. The hospital was about an hour away, tucked behind a row of strip malls and gas stations in the part of town where everything feels like it was designed by someone who didn't expect anyone to be there for long. I parked at the edge of the lot, far from the main entrance, and sat there with the engine running for a full 10 minutes, just staring at the automatic glass doors that led into a building I'd been in before, but never under circumstances that involved life and death. I thought about the last real conversation I'd had with my father, the one where I asked why he'd never stepped in when Zach started defaulting on everything we'd agreed to, the one where he shrugged and said, "That's between you boys," as if decades of silence were some kind of neutral stance instead of complicity. I thought about being 15, holding a flashlight while he worked on the plumbing, him barking orders like I was a laborer instead of a son, never once saying thank you. Never once looking up to see if I was cold or tired or just wanted to be a kid for 5 damn minutes. I thought about the way he praised Zach for showing up late with a pizza more than he ever praised me for paying off his bills when they fell behind. And I realized something in that parking lot, something I hadn't said out loud even to myself. I didn't owe him closure. I didn't owe anyone the performance of reconciliation just because biology said we shared blood. What I owed was to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to the version of me that had finally stopped bleeding out trying to be good enough. I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out a piece of scratch paper and a pen, and wrote a single line. No signature. No explanation. Just 7 words. Tell him I wish him peace. Nothing more. I got out of the car, walked across the asphalt, and slid the note under the wiper blade of Mom's sedan, which I recognized instantly even though I hadn't seen it in months. Then I got back into my own car, turned the key, and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't check my phone. I didn't cry. I just drove. By the time the message came through, I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to expect a fight every time my phone buzzed, which is probably why I felt so still, so eerily calm when I saw Zach's wife's name on my screen after all those months of nothing. The silence had stretched so long it became its own kind of language, one I'd grown fluent in, one I'd even started to prefer. There were no surprises, no guilt bombs, no backhanded concern wrapped in soft words. Just me, my thoughts, and the slow reconstruction of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. But there it was, plain as day in my inbox, written in lowercase with no punctuation, as if casualness might soften the edges of what they were really asking. "Hey Greg, we'd like to talk, maybe clear the air." No hello, no acknowledgement of what had happened. No apology, not even a hint of one. Just a dangling sentence dropped into the quiet like a pebble into a pond, hoping I'd come running back to see the ripples. I didn't respond. Not immediately. Not the next day. Not at all. Instead, I sat with it. Let it hang there. Watched the message mark itself as seen on their end and imagined Julie showing Zach my lack of reply, both of them sitting on their couch in whatever rental they'd managed to land after getting kicked out of the house I legally sold. I pictured Zach running his hands through his hair like he always did when things didn't go his way, mumbling something about how I was being dramatic, unreasonable, cold. Maybe I was cold now. Maybe that's what happens when you finally stop offering warmth to people who keep using it to burn you. I went back to therapy that week, more out of maintenance than crisis. Danielle asked how I felt seeing that message after so long, and I surprised myself by telling her I felt nothing, not relief, not pain, not even anger. Just nothing. She nodded like she understood completely and said, "Sometimes numbness is what peace looks like in the early stages." I liked that. I wrote it down in my notebook after the session, circled it twice. The truth is, I wasn't the same man they remembered. I wasn't the one who bent over backward to avoid confrontation, who said yes to keep things quiet, who let holidays pass with his name left off invitations and still showed up with wine and a fake smile. That guy was gone. Buried under layers of truth, I finally let rise to the surface. And honestly, I didn't want to go back to that version of me, not even for a moment. Not even if they apologized, not that they ever really would, not sincerely. I knew my family too well to expect a Hallmark ending. They weren't reaching out because they understood the pain they caused. They were reaching out because they missed the version of me who made things easier for them. They missed the Greg who didn't ask for anything, who cleaned up their messes without keeping score. They missed their human insurance policy. But I didn't miss them. Not in that way. I took a week off work and booked a rental cabin 2 hours north, not near the old lake house, but somewhere new, somewhere mine. It had a dock that creaked when you walked on it, a little fire pit out back, and no Wi-Fi. It was exactly what I needed. I brought a stack of books I'd been meaning to read for years, a bag of groceries I actually picked out for myself instead of eating whatever was easiest, and a notebook I didn't plan to fill with anything heavy, just thoughts, sketches, idle daydreams. I spent the days walking trails that curved through woods thick with the scent of pine and old rain, and the nights wrapped in a blanket, watching the sky darken like ink poured over glass. There was no pressure. No expectation. Just breath. It was on the second night there, sitting on that dock with a mug of tea going lukewarm in my hand, that I played her last voicemail again. I'd saved it, not out of sentimentality, but because I hadn't been ready to hear it again until now. My mother's voice, soft but tight, like she was trying to hold back everything she never learned how to say the right way. "You always said you never needed us," she said. "But we need you now." She didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't mention the house, or Christmas, or Zach. Just that one sentence, looping in my mind like the echo of something fragile finally cracking under its own weight. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark water, wondering what kind of mother needs a son only when he becomes inconvenient to ignore. Wondering what kind of family lets you drift for decades, then acts like you're cruel for learning how to swim on your own. Would I ever forgive them? Could I? I didn't know. That's the thing about healing, it isn't a straight line. Some days you feel like a new person. Other days, you still feel the bruise when someone says your name the wrong way. But in that moment, I didn't feel bruised. I felt open. Not to them, maybe not yet, maybe not ever. But open to the idea that I could build something better from here, even if it was just for me. I pulled out my phone, stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the voicemail. Then I smiled. A small, tired smile that came from somewhere deep. I hit delete. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just gone. Then I lit a fire in the pit behind the cabin, watched the flames rise slow and steady into the sky, and sat back in the chair I had chosen for myself. No decision made. No answers given. Just peace. And sometimes, that's the only ending you get.